and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Trump admits there's a transition cost to his tariff policy and acknowledges economic problems and says he hopes to work out a deal with China. The US and Russian officials meet in Turkey for diplomatic talks, but the US says Ukraine is off the agenda. Meanwhile, defence ministers from 30 countries gather at the Coalition of the Willing summit as the UK pledges more military support for Ukraine. Now to our top story. In the last hour, President Donald Trump has admitted there's a transition cost to his tariff policy. While speaking during a cabinet meeting at the White House, he also acknowledged economic problems and said he hopes to work out a deal with China. Let's take a look.
Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing. We're doing again what we should have done many years ago. We let it get out of control, and we allowed some countries to get very big and very rich at our expense, and can't let that happen. It's not a sustainable formula.
Earlier this evening, I spoke to Republican strategist and president and co-founder of Spencer Pruitt, Hunter S. Gayler, if Trump was a mastermind or a maverick.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a maverick or a mastermind. I think what we're seeing is an America First policy. I think it's the Trump trade reset. I don't think we're witnessing a retreat. I think we're witnessing a recalibration. And I think by President Trump pausing tariffs globally is not a sign of weakness, but it's a very strategic move to isolate, in this particular case, Beijing, and stabilize our global partners.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dr. Elie Hindy, Professor of International Relations at the American University in the Emirates, and Shane McGinley, News Editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight. Thank you so much for both joining me this evening. Great to have you both on. So, Shane, Trump finally blinked.
Yes, yeah. When I was here on Tuesday night, we did say who's going to blink first. And I honestly didn't think I'd be here two days later saying this is all that's happened. But there was a great quote from today. There's lots of great quotes, as you just showed, when Trump said, "What a day." And that is a complete understatement. Because when we have a DC correspondent at AGBI, and when she filed last night, oil was up, the markets were reacting really, really well. Then I woke up this morning, oil was back down, and now we've seen in the last couple of hours that the stock markets, which opened really well in both Asia and Europe, and I think it was the biggest one-day gain since late 2022. So this was all this is all good reaction. But then the last couple of hours, all of these notes are nearly pointless now, because I was just reading while we were coming in here that the markets have gone back down again. So what a day is a real understatement, and Trump saying it's a beautiful thing is wow.
He said eventually it's going to be beautiful. He didn't say it is.
Yeah, but then how long can people wait for it, like the eventuality, and how long is that eventuality going to be? Because there was one great stat I saw earlier today as well, which was the consumer price index, which is basically the people on the street. We're not talking the Elon Musk billionaires. We're talking like the people on the streets, real Americans, people who voted for Trump. That was actually down 0.1% in last month. So I was kind of thinking, well, all of this great work that he could have used this to say, look, I'm in office now, things are getting cheaper. All of the analysts that I read that were on Reuters were saying that this is going to now be reversed. And when we're at the end of this month, when we're looking at the consumer price index, it'll probably be the opposite.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. I think he definitely have a big challenge, and the pressure is going to build up until the midterm elections. By that time, if things don't start to show real fruits for the average American person, I think the Republican Party is going to take a very big hit.
And I think this was really interesting that you mentioned that, because I was reading earlier, obviously a stunning turn by Donald Trump. We had that news come out that he would possibly pause for 90 days. The White House said it was fake news. 2 days later, he did pause. But a lot of people are speculating that that actually came from Republicans and the concern over the midterm elections.
Definitely. I think many significant supporters of the Republican Party have lost huge amounts of money in what happened. Definitely they feel the repercussion on people, and they asked him to take it a bit slower. I think this is a fact. That said, I still think that the majority of the American people see in what he's doing as something positive, as something that should have been done a long time ago, because where the US or how the US was going is really not sustainable, whether in the international debt or the trade deficit or all of these things. So something very crucial had to be done. Now, Trump is doing it in Trump's way, and this is definitely brings all the demons out, and definitely some recalibration was needed.
Dr. Elie and Shane, a question for both of you. Dr. Elie, for you first. Reputation, we know Donald Trump, he's a big man of reputation. He likes to be seen as strong on a global stage. What do you think this is going to do for his reputation?
Definitely, this is a big challenge. He has blinked, as we said. He stepped back on something that he's doing, but still he's on the same course that he promised he would go for, and he is still fulfilling very rigorously all his election promises. So I think he's careful on that side. Now, his image and his reputation in the world is already very damaged. I mean, he's not on good terms with almost 90% of the leaders of the world. They fear him somehow, but they definitely don't like him. Even those who are somehow on good terms with the US, they have this hesitance on how to deal, how unpredictable he is, and how he's going to react to all things. This does not mean that he cannot get the work done through his deals, through his push, through the power that he has, through the American economy and the American power altogether.
Well, I think you said about getting the deals done. I think the art of the deal is what we hear a lot about. But I think all of these sort of dozens of leaders that are calling up. When we were here on Tuesday, it was kind of thinking it was in Trump's court, and he'll call the tariffs, or he'll put a tariff on this, that, and the other. But now that he's pulled back, I think that loses a little bit of his bargaining chip.
Sure.
And because they'll think, okay, well, if we just let the S&P suffer a bit more, oil has gone down. A lot of his sort of trump cards, you could say, are sort of falling by the wayside. But as we've seen, 24 hours is a long time, and things could change again. We're kind of, it's now back in China's court, so to speak. Like, how are they going to react? And I think that will be the key. So it's is Beijing going to blink? It's just really, it's scary, to be honest.
And I think the problem is that all these measures are going to take a really long term to start to show fruits, like on bringing back industries into the US, like companies shifting their production and all of that. This is a very long-term thing. How long is this transitional period, and how much suffering will it take? This is where the big challenge is. And this is where I think he needs to keep pulling the people towards his policies, keep transparent communication with his people, and of course keep raising their hopes that we're still on the right track and eventually things are going to be beautiful.
Do you think he wants to bring manufacturing back to the US, but is that realistic? Because if the reason that there's so much...
I'm not an economist, I know that.
I know. But I think that's the sort of ultimate goal. But if you bring all the manufacturing back to the US, where are the low-cost workers that are going to do all of these manual jobs?
Yeah.
You would have said it's immigrants, but that's a completely another debate. So I'm not really sure that's going to be realistic, and I'm not sure that's going to be achieved within 4 years, the way manufacturing timelines are. And even one of my reporters was looking at a story in relation to cars. If you want to do more sort of car manufacturing, a lot of the car parts are built in other parts of the world. So that means American cars are going to get more expensive immediately in the short term. Which, are American consumers going to be happy with more expensive cars. But on the flip side, I just saw as well that BMW has said that it's going to boost its production in the US to appease Trump. So that will be interesting if all of these international players do actually kind of look at increasing their manufacturing capacity if they can. So it's a bit of sort of give and take on both sides. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
I feel like we use the word uncertainty a lot, but I think we've really got into that uncertain territory. And I think Donald Trump said that the markets had the yips yesterday, something I'd never been heard of in business news before. But I think that's the thing, isn't it? Right now, like both of you say, we don't know what the future holds. It's a wait and see situation at the moment. But I'll be back with both of you in a second. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The US Citizenship and Immigration Services will screen immigrants' social media for evidence of anti-Semitic activities. The policy, which goes into effect immediately, affects those applying for permanent residence, foreign students, and those associated with education institutions. The Department of Homeland Security believes it will protect the US from extremists. Turkish police have detained 2 opposition journalists in Istanbul as part of an investigation into alleged threats and blackmail. Timur Soykan and Murat Ariel are both known for their investigative reporting and have been critical towards government policies and institutions. Now, the amount of electricity needed to power the world's data centres could double in the next 5 years. That's according to an international energy report. It's believed the increase is down to the development and use of AI. And a source close to the Universal theme park set to open in the UK in 2031 has revealed the brands which could appear at the park. James Bond, Paddington and Lord of the Rings are just a few of the well-known franchises being discussed. Rides and attractions related to Harry Potter are not expected to be included. Delegation teams from the US and Russia have arrived in Istanbul today to discuss diplomatic plans between the West and Moscow. The meetings, taking place at the Russian consulate in Turkey's capital, come as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues, which has prompted the freezing of diplomatic property. Let's get into this more with Dr. Elie and Shane. Dr. Elie, to you first. So, what's the focus of these discussions?
It seems, first of all, it came as a surprise. Why Turkey? Why at this time? But it seems from the information that we're getting that this is going to be a side parallel track of the American-Russian negotiations, focusing specifically on re-establishing proper diplomatic channels and fixing the situation of both embassies. Because due to sanctions, due to the unhealthy relation, they've had so much trouble even in processing the very basic diplomatic actions. Like, for example, Russia was complaining that they cannot even pay their diplomats due to the sanctions and financial controls and so on. So I think we're looking for trust-building talks that could advance the Russian-American overall talks a step forward.
Yeah, definitely. And Shane, the US State Department has confirmed that Ukraine discussions are completely off the table. What do we make of this?
Yeah, I was surprised by that. It's kind of like the white elephant in the room. So I think it might be difficult to discuss like what's going on in your countries without speaking about Ukraine from a Russian perspective. But you were saying earlier when we were chatting that is realistic and that it's probably likely that they will not speak about it.
I think so. I think we still see a hesitance of Putin to delve into the Ukraine issue, and he's going to try to take as much as he can from the US before he gets to the actual giving part on the Ukraine settlement deal. So I think it is quite realistic to say that these are technical. These aim at simply building a little bit of trust and not the full-blown negotiations that's going to handle all of it. But then also we need to remember that there's a lot to be discussed between the US and Russia on the whole world stage. Ukraine is one part of the piece of the puzzle that is, of course, very significant and important, but they have so many other things to discuss. And they made sure to make that clear in the negotiation in Saudi Arabia, that we're discussing the broader relations rather than only the Ukraine.
And it's interesting that it's been held in Turkey, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought that was quite a sort of a coup by the Turks, because I think there's a lot of benefit to Turkey in Russia coming back into sort of the Western fold, because Turkey's heavily dependent, like a lot of European countries as well, on Russian energy, and also there's a lot of Russian investment in Turkish energy facilities like nuclear power, which was quite difficult to see the money flowing because of the sanctions. So I think Turkey's probably looking, this is good optics for them to have them sitting down, and it will benefit Moscow and Washington getting closer together. And I think it'll benefit everyone in the world, because the Biden administration didn't make many advances in that regard. And we're talking about Iran talks on Tuesday, and I still think all talking is good talking.
Maybe Erdogan is also looking for a win with all the internal troubles that he's facing.
Yeah, exactly. Good optics as well to have. It makes him look powerful by sort of have all of these powerful leaders in the country, and positive news, I guess, for him as well.
Yeah.
And just on the Iran talks, Dr. Elie, we do know that the US and Iran delegations are going to meet on Saturday.
Sure.
How critical is this right now?
I think we're walking at the edge in that sense. Trump, as he usually does, he's threatening with the use of force. He's mobilizing a lot of military weapons and equipments to the region, but at the same time, he's opening doors for negotiations with a big difference than Biden. His open door is with very clear terms, with no preconditions set. For example, Iran has always constantly wanted to keep away the issue of militias and the missile program and so on, and negotiate only the Iranian nuclear program. For Trump, it's a whole deal that's going to deal with all of these issues, that's going to deal with the Iranian presence in the region. Now, whether these talks have good chances of success or no, it's a very debatable issue. I do believe that the Iranian regime is looking for a deal, at least to pass the time of Trump, and maybe bet on a longer-term change in the American politics.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Stay right there. We've got more headlines to discuss. I'll be back with you shortly. Right now, we're going to stick to the US-Russia relations, as a Russian-American citizen who was serving a 12-year prison sentence in Russia has been released today as part of a prisoner swap between Moscow and Washington. Ksenia Karlina was found guilty of treason in a Russian court, accused of donating money to a US-based charity that provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Sarah Firth has this story.
Emerging from a van, dual US-Russian national Ksenia Karlina takes her first steps towards freedom, boarding a plane after an ordeal that saw her jailed in Russia. Her release, part of a prisoner swap you can see taking place here in Abu Dhabi. The swap between Russia and the USA was for dual German-Russian citizen Arthur Petrov, seen here getting checked over by doctors. He was arrested in 2023 in Cyprus at the request of the United States for allegedly exporting sensitive microelectronics. Ksenia had been jailed for 12 years in Russia for a $51 charity donation to an organization supporting Ukraine, which a Russian court had ruled amounted to treason. She's been a US citizen since 2021 and was arrested during a family visit to Russia last January. Her lawyer at the time saying,
She did not investigate what kind of fund it was. Moreover, neither the investigation nor the court established this either. I don't know this, and Ksenia doesn't remember now, due to the time that has passed, where and who gave her the details of this fund. She was in a foreign country, among a large number of representatives of foreign states. Someone recommended this fund to her as one where she could send money to support people affected by the special military operation from both sides.
This prisoner swap, the latest in a series of high-profile swaps. US teacher Mark Fogel released from a Russian prison in February during a visit by Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff to Moscow. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Russia's sovereign wealth fund chief Kirill Dmitriev were involved in those negotiations. And in August last year, the United States and Russia carried out their biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War, with 24 prisoners gaining freedom, including US journalist Evan Gershkovich and ex-US Marine Paul Whelan. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirming today Ksenia Karolina's homecoming. Sarah Firth, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Defence ministers from 30 countries have gathered in Brussels today for another Coalition of the Willing meeting. The talks, hosted at NATO's headquarters and spearheaded by the UK and France, have discussed proposals for a so-called reassurance force in Ukraine to guarantee a post-conflict peace deal with Russia. So, Shane, we were just talking about talks. We've had quite a lot of talks today, haven't we? And we're talking about the talks. But what have they discussed at the summit today?
Well, like you said, there was these 30 countries and the reassurance force. So in a nutshell, it's trying to decide who's going to give boots on the ground, who's going to give what. So they've said that it'll possibly be till the end of this month to decide. But I think the sort of spanner in the works is, again, Trump and the tariffs, because if a lot of these countries are seeing, economic constraints is the best way of probably putting it, how are they supposed to put more of their GDP into defence and then, support Ukraine? So that is the only concern and the sort of potential sort of fly in the ointment that I can see in all of these negotiations, is that they can't ignore what is happening in terms of economic instances. But like you said, again, talks are all good, but trying to get 30 countries to agree on something might be quite difficult, I think. So by the end of this month, do you think that's optimistic?
Well, I think even if they agree, the challenge is what's going to U.S. position be with regards to that, and whether are they going to deploy even without U.S. support or not? And what's going to be Russia's reaction to such a deployment? So I think the political picture of that adds to the complexity of the technicality and the budgeting and all the agreements that needs to happen first. It's not obvious at all. I think we need to remember that all the war in Ukraine happened when Russia felt the threat that Western forces are going to be on its border. And military equipment and missiles and so on. This is why Russia gave as an excuse to invade Ukraine. So what are we suggesting here? Yes, you did invade, but when we have peace, we will send our troops anyway. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But definitely altogether, it's a challenge for the Europeans to pick up on their defense and between brackets, mature away from the American sponsorship of that defense. Are they able to do that regardless of what's happening in Ukraine? I think it's a need for Europe to do that and step ahead in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I was commenting earlier, I think like in the last Trump term, I remember he spoke a lot about his allies, specifically in Europe, not giving enough to NATO and not putting enough GDP into defense. And I remember when the UK election happened a couple of months ago, defence GDP expenses made a lot of the headlines. And in fairness to Trump, now everyone is putting a lot more into defence. So it was a good chessboard move on his behalf. So I think that was a good move behind him. I'll give him that one. So he's managed to get them to do more defence in less than 100 days in office. It feels like he's been a lot longer, probably, but
yeah, it
less
does.
than that. So I think that was a good move by him, and it was probably well overdue.
What I thought was quite interesting when we speak about the coalition of the willing is the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has seemed to sort of also really shone in this space. He's come together and he's had discussions with President Trump. He's obviously brought Europe closer together. We saw that spat between Trump and Zelensky at the White House. It seemed to be that Keir Starmer was the Prime Minister that softened that relationship. Do you think Britain has actually played a good key role here?
I think both Britain and France, they feel the pressure to lead Europe into that direction. And Britain is in a better position to liaise with the US and coordinate things in that matter. But we also need to remember that both leaders, the British and the French, are not on excellent terms with Trump. And he's practically supporting their opponents in the upcoming elections whenever that happens. So this also, we need to keep it in the background of our minds. But also another dimension to put in, Britain is not the EU. So Britain is outside of the EU, yet they are taking that leading role. So what's the shape of that new defense structure that's going to be created? Is it an EU structure, a European structure, a NATO structure, or under NATO? This is all things that remain to be seen.
And it looks good for Keir Starmer anyway. Like he's not having a great time domestically. So they always say, like, if you're suffering, have a war abroad, and it makes him look good to be standing with all of these like European leaders, looking like a proper statesman on the stage.
Maybe the UK should return to the EU. What do you think about that?
I think so.
Let's not open that door.
No, please don't open the Brexit tin can again. I felt like, that's a difficult one. But once again, if we just talk about Brexit and we talk about UK relations with the European Union, in some way, Donald Trump has kind of brought them back together, which can't be a bad thing.
It is not a bad thing, definitely, but we have to see what they will make out of it. Yeah. And then it's important to see what you're doing, and not always good to see why you're doing it or who are you doing it against. So any force that is created just to oppose Putin or just to oppose something in that sense is not the sustainable way of building things. So we have to see how this is built, or what is the value behind this new defense discussion, and what is it going to be targeted against.
I guess so. I guess, once again, there's more questions than answers. But stay right there, and I'll be back with you. To our next story, and Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan has met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington. Their meeting comes ahead of President Trump's official visit to Riyadh next month. So, Elie, as unrest does continue in the Middle East, what is going to be on the agenda for these talks?
I think, first of all, it's one of the sequence of visits that are very important in showing off the role that KSA is playing in the current period, with a huge focus on stability and peace in the region, in between brackets, of course. I think a big part of this would be discussing how to keep stability in the region, but also a part of it would be what to expect from Trump's visit to KSA, that is hopefully upcoming next month, as we hear. And Trump made sure to have his first international visit to KSA. So he surely wants to get a lot out of that. What is that a lot? How much is that a lot in quantitative terms, in financial terms? I think this is part of the discussion and all the preparations visits that are happening. And again, it's building on a historical strategic alliance of more than 70, 80 years.
Shane, you're the businessman, if I can put it that way. What do you think? What investments will be spoken about? If we have a crystal ball, what are we looking into?
Well, obviously there's the 600 billion figure that has already been out there, and then Trump did round it up to $1 trillion. Which,
yeah, we're going to bring it to $1 trillion.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like
Why
to
not?
Yeah, exactly. It's only 400 billion here and there. So I think that'll obviously be on the cards. They'll obviously sort of talk about sort of tariffs, which I think is not massively impacting this part of the region heavily compared to some other countries. But obviously they'll have to talk about oil. Oil is huge for Saudi Arabia. So they obviously don't want the price to be hindered by what's happening on the world stage. But I think at the end of the day, this part of the world has the benefit that the Crown Prince and Donald Trump seem to have a good personal relationship, which you can't say for a lot of countries and a lot of leaders at the moment. So the optics look good for Saudi Arabia and for the wider GCC. So I think that is a positive to look forward to.
I think for Trump, the GCC is the right place to start from. After all, he's on bad terms with everybody else. So the GCC, and also a lot is happening economically and financially and business terms in the GCC. So he definitely wants to tap into that thing that is happening here from an economic perspective. And also, let's see that how many countries are willing to invest $1 trillion in the US in that sense. If he comes up with such a number or even close to it, I think Saudi Arabia is presenting itself as a potential strong ally, as a potential good partner that is willing to give, not only take in this relationship. And this is what I think Trump is looking for altogether.
Well, actually, earlier I spoke to Al Arabia's geopolitical security analyst, Riyad Khawaji, and he told us what he thought about Saudi's relationship with Trump and their expectations.
Saudi Arabia is going to be one of the biggest partners, business partners, economic partners to the United States during the Trump administration. This has been announced already, talking about investments in the range of $1 trillion and above. For Trump, this is music. The U.S., especially in the current circumstances, badly need this sort of a relationship with a major international player like Saudi Arabia. So I think President Trump has a lot high expectations from this visit, and Saudi Arabia is also has high expectations of its relationship with the U.S., of bringing about more stability, more business, more technology to the kingdom.
So, Dr. Elie, we just heard from our very own geopolitical security analyst, Riyad Khawaji there. But I wanted to move on to something else. Saudi seems to be playing a real crucial role on the diplomatic stage. What more do we know about this?
I think it's important to notice this path that has been forged by the KSA new leadership as, first of all, liberating themselves from dependency, be it on the US or any other player, and opening all doors. And this has allowed them to play a significant diplomatic role in terms of mediation. We saw Russia and the US meet in KSA. They had an excellent relation and a great summit, GCC, led by KSA, with the EU, and building on that strategic alliance. They have excellent relationship with China. So I think they did position themselves in quite a pivotal role in the world diplomacy, and they've become a significant player in that sense.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much. And finally, we've actually reached the point in the show where Dr. Elie and Shane, you've both come up with some quirky stories, actually. And Elie, let's start with yours. Yours is about a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy who refused a photo with a Russian at a karate contest. What more do we know?
Well, we know that it was an international competition, and these young people got, I think, to third and fourth position, and they got their medals and so on. But then when they were asked to take a collective picture, the Ukrainian young guy decided to leave the stage and say, no way, I will not take a picture with terrorist, between brackets. And he made sure to give the face signs and the hand gestures to say that this is not going to happen. And for me, I think it was a very significant symbolic story of how we bring young people into the conflicts and how we are raising our new generations to hatred to the other components. While at least in sports, we should have politics away from that and let the young people enjoy the competition and being better people out of that sports. So it was significant for me. I thought it would be good to bring it up in that sense.
What do you think, Shane? Should sports and politics always be kept separately?
I'm sort of unusually on the fence on this one. I think, yes, you should always keep sort of politics out of all sports, but I was kind of putting it into context, and I was kind of thinking, as an Irish person back in the days when things were a little bit more frosty with neighbours, what would I like to see happen? So it is a difficult one, but at the end of the day, humans are emotional, and they're not always diplomatic, as we've just discussed throughout the entire show so far today.
Yeah.
So I think these things are always going to happen, but as long as they're in the minority, hopefully.
Yep, that's very true. I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I always think you're taught about sportsmanship, and I don't know how you do feel in that situation. But let's move on, Shane. You've got a story which is pretty amazing. It's about a lottery ticket that was really, really lucky.
Yes, it was a man in Maryland in the US, and he went to, to help his mother clear out she was obviously maybe having a Marie Kondo sort of moment and decluttering, and actually found a lottery ticket and scratched it, and it won $50,000.
Wow.
So, which, to be honest, the reason I like this story is because when I was home in Ireland recently, my mother did the exact same thing to me, and I did actually find a lotto ticket and a lottery ticket. None of them had any money on it.
Oh, no.
And there was actually one that I found that was actually out of date, and I thought, can you imagine if you scratched it and there was a winning on it and it was out of date? That would have been just completely, tragic. But I want to put a question to you. The guy did promise before he scratched it that he would give half the money to his mother if he won, and then he did win. Would you do the same?
Yes, no. I actually thought about this, and you could probably react to it too. But I feel like my mum's given me a lot of money over the years, you know. I've had times in my life when I've been at university and I was on my last sort of few pounds and I was desperate, and then what do? You ring the bank of mum and dad, isn't it? So I think I owe you a lot to my family. Yeah.
But I think not only parents. I mean, if you got the ticket from someone and you promised, okay, you got this ticket, it's not something that you found, and does not belong to anyone. I think I would honor this pledge of giving part of it.
I did look at this I went down a complete rabbit hole of looking at unclaimed winnings in these kind of sort of lotteries, and there's a lot of them. I can't really believe this is the case. And there's one out there that's 1.1 billion in New Jersey and has not been claimed yet.
Wow.
So if you're in New Jersey, get looking around in the attic.
Yeah, get searching. I always think it's incredible because I'm just not very lucky when it came to this thing. I remember when I lived in London, there was what is it, the Euro Millions? We had the Euro Millions.
Yeah.
I always used to never got my money back, sadly. But I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are things that we keep in a house for a long time, and when we clear out, it's amazing what we're able to find. It's like lost treasure.
Yeah, 100%. And so I think everyone should start looking in their attics and stuff like that and see what they can find.
Yeah, everyone go into your attics and your garages because you might find some...
There's a lot there, that's for sure.
Well, thank you so much for those quirky stories. I really appreciate it. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Thanks to today's guest, Dr. Elie Hindy, Professor of International Relations at the American University in the Emirates, and Shane McGinley, News Editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Trump admits there's a transition cost to his tariff policy and acknowledges economic problems and says he hopes to work out a deal with China. US and Russian officials meet in Turkey for diplomatic talks, but the US says Ukraine is off the agenda. Meanwhile, defence ministers from 30 countries gather at the Coalition of Willing Summit as the UK pledges more military support for Ukraine. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. That's followed by The Dressing Room. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.